Okay, so thanks, Julian, for sharing. With that, we'll get going. So this course is, as the title says, it's a course for which is to be an introduction to ARCHER2 for software developers. So we run a similar course for package users, as we call them. So people who want to just log on to ARCHER2 and load VASP or GROMACS or LAMPS or any of the other software packages that we have centrally installed, and they want to just start running simulations with them. This course includes some extra material to help those of you who actually want to write code on ARCHER2, build code on ARCHER2, and debug and profile that code on ARCHER2. So it's a longer course, it's more in depth. Hopefully you'll find it useful, and you'll be able to use it to get going on ARCHER2. I think some of you already have access to it, and others I think are hoping to get access soon. This should hopefully give you a kickstart in getting going once you're on the system with your code, ready to do whatever you want to do with it. So I guess we can go into the welcome section to start. Thanks, Julian. Yes, so we'll be using the Carpentries methodology here. So we've got some this website to go through. We'll work through it all together. Here and there are little sections of exercises where I'll essentially hand it over to all of you listening in. We've got some sections on just working out, what is good practice. There's a couple of coding sections tomorrow. Sections on how to submit jobs and learn about the hardware infrastructure of ARCHER2. So yes, so we'll be sort of working through this together. Once I can get my screen sharing set up properly again, work out what's happened to Chrome here. I'll also have a terminal open so I can show you what I'm doing. Thankfully, that doesn't matter too much this first section. So I'll have the material and a terminal, and I can show you what I'm doing. You can do it at the same time. And if we come across any problems, we'll work through them. We do have an Etherpad, as it's called. This is essentially a shared document on the cloud, which we can all edit. And at the moment, I would have asked you to, asked all of us to just put our names in and what we're interested in and the like there, except that it's down just now. Hopefully we'll get that back soon. But what I'll do is any time during this course we come across some useful information or anything someone thinks would be useful, any handy commands or just anything that we think we might want to come back to, I'll put it in that document. And after the course is finished, that will also be made available to all of you. Of course, we'll go through it first and strip out any personally identifiable information. So you don't need to worry about your names floating around on it or anything about you. It'll just contain the useful tidbits that we decide to add to it. Finally, we will ask for feedback, and it would be fantastic if you could provide this, whether it's good or bad, anything that you think we didn't touch on and you wish we had, or anything that you think that you wish we'd focused on more. Anything like that would be useful. That will help us improve it. There are actually some changes in the course this time from the previous run because of some feedback which was really helpful. So we're going to spend a little bit more time this time focusing on debugging and profiling your code. So anything at all which you wish had been different, or if you do just want to say, I think it was fine, anything at all is very useful and we'd really appreciate hearing it from you. At the bottom, there are a few key points. We should all follow, while we're in this course, the ARCHER2 Code of Conduct, which is available through the ARCHER2 website. It essentially comes down to be nice to each other. Thankfully, that's fairly simple to do. And we will be, it is flexible. The point of this Carpentries methodology is that it is flexible. We do have a schedule that can change if it turns out during the course that enough people want to focus on something different. We can change what we do. And yes, and again, feedback is essential. Something else I'd just quickly like to note before we start is that the final session tomorrow, this is the final session tomorrow afternoon, sorry, is a sort of very open session where we allow you, the attendees, to essentially choose what we do. If you have code which you would like to take onto ARCHER2 using your accounts, either ones that you have as part of a project that you're a member of, or as accounts that you've got through this course, you can take that code onto ARCHER2. You can try to get it built using tools we'll talk about today and tomorrow. And if you want help or advice or tips or anything, we will be here in that session to help you do it. We can let you screen share, we can screen share. We also have an alternative task if you would like to try doing some profiling on ARCHER2. And again, we will be here tomorrow afternoon to help you get going as a developer on ARCHER2. So if you would like to do this, I would just advise you now to start thinking, you know, I've got an afternoon on ARCHER2 with help from people who use ARCHER2. What would I like to do then? And then hopefully tomorrow afternoon, you'll be able to get some real use essentially out of us as the course people to help you do that. And as Julian said, yes, of course, I knew I would of course forget something, and it's really important. As Julian said, please do ask questions. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you get going as ARCHER2 developers. So this is the best time for you to get help. If you think of any questions, please do ask. And with that, we'll actually get going with the session itself. So our first session is fairly simple. It's just getting connected to ARCHER2 and how to transfer data. So hopefully those of you who don't already have project accounts on ARCHER2 will have been able to get accounts through this course. You should have got an email, and I know that a lot of you have used the information in that email to request accounts on ARCHER2 and have got them. I've done a couple, I think, this morning. So with those accounts, you should be able to log on. We just use standard SSH. So if you're on Linux or Mac OS, you'll just be using the SSH command at the terminal. If you're on Windows, you might be using MobaXterm or PuTTY, or perhaps Windows Subsystem for Linux. Something to note, as it says here, excuse me, is that we do use both a password and a passphrase protected SSH key pair to log in. Some sites use only one or the other, or they allow people to just use an SSH key to log in. We use both because it essentially enhances the security of the system to a much greater degree. So at this point, I'm just going to quickly start, if it will let me, just a little poll to ask everyone on the course if you've been able to log in to ARCHER2. So you should see this in just a second. Here we go. So you should see a little box pop up in front of you, and you can just choose yes or no to say whether you've been able to log in or not. Okay, I'm seeing a good number of people have. So again, at the moment, if you've been trying to log into ARCHER2 and are having problems, now really is the point to ask in chat, or you can put your hands up now and ask if you would prefer to just speak, and we can help you get logged in. Or perhaps you just haven't had the chance yet to create your account and log in. If any of you do want to create an account, the code that you need to use on the safe, as a reminder, is TA062. Let's put that in the chat. If you do have your own account under another project, you're of course very welcome to use that. We do have one advantage to using using an account created under this course for today and tomorrow, in that people who create a project account will be able to use some node reservations that we have in place. So we've essentially walled off a block of a small block of nodes just for us on the course to use today and tomorrow, so that we don't have to potentially wait a while in the queue. Okay, so I can see excuse me, I can see a couple of people haven't been able to log in yet. So if you haven't tried yet, now would be a great time to try. If you have tried, and if you know that you're having any problems, please do ask. Okay, so moving on then, we've got, what you can see here's our first exercise in just a second. I'll stop that poll. So our first section just here, again, we're just sort of thinking generally about logging into ARCHER2, is about the password and password policy. So those of you who've already logged in will know this. Those of you who haven't yet will not know, but when you create your account on the Safe, you first of all, you request an account under a certain project. So in the case of this project, it's TA062. When you request that, the PI and any managers of the project are then asked to approve or deny the request for an account. So when you do that, you may be left waiting a little while, essentially until the people in charge of the project are able to see the request for an account and approve or deny it. Generally, anyone who should be asking for a project on that account will get it, because there's no reason to deny it. Once that's been approved, then your account will actually be created on the ARCHER2 system itself. You should have also given an SSH key as part of the account creation process. But then the time gets when you actually want to log on for the first time, and you might be thinking, where do I get my password from? As I've just said, we use both a password and an SSH key to log on. So the very first time that you log in, you actually get your password from the Safe itself. You log in and you go to the page for your account. If you mouse over login accounts in the top bar, and then you'll see your account listed, you can click on that and you'll see your account page. You'll probably come here quite a lot, because this page also shows you resources and the like. But you can then click on a button on this page to get your initial single-use password that lets you log in. And I think Julian's just demonstrating this. Fantastic. So Julian's just logging in. So probably most of you have seen this already.
Sorry, I need to get my password. I never remember it.
Sure, I'm the exact same. This is possibly a good time to say to everyone, if you don't use a password manager, I can really recommend it, because I'm terrible with passwords. So I use LastPass, but there are lots of options. There's 1Password. Oh goodness, there are lots and lots of options out there. Okay, so Julian's just done what I was talking about. He's just come on to a course page. So you can see here he has lots and lots of login accounts. And down here at the bottom, there's this row of orange buttons. And on there is a button called View Login Account Password. And if you click on that, you'll see a new page, and that page will show you what password to use the first time that you log into ARCHER2.
So for this coursework page, I've already changed my password, which means it no longer shows my current password, which is why I'm okay to click and show you what it kind of looks like. But you get your password here at the
Yeah,
very end as a temporary password, so it's no longer valid.
yeah.
Otherwise,
It kind
it
of
shows.
says that here. It has it in italics and green. Logged in and changed your password. That change will not be reflected here. So that's something really important to remember. Once you log in and change your password, as Julian said, and as it says here, you won't be able to come back to this page and get a password to use until you reset it, which you can do again on that same page we were on just before this one. So if you do forget your password, you can request a password reset, and then you can go back to the View Login Account Password button there and get a new password to use. But to go back to the material about the password policy, so yes, as it says here, so you'll log in the first time using that password that you get from the safe, and straight away on logging in, you'll then be asked to change to a password of your choice. So you'll be asked first of all to enter the same login password once more, and then you'll be asked to choose your new password twice. Oh, and Williams just recommended as well, KeyPassXC, Bitwarden are also great password managers. Yet there are lots and lots out there. I'm not really certain if there's a best option as such. Probably just do a little investigation and see if any match your use case, I suppose. A lot provide smartphone apps and the like as well, or give you, family plans if you want to make sure other people in your family are also keeping their passwords safe. There are lots of options out there, but I would really recommend using a password manager. Okay, yes, so when it comes to actually choosing your password, there is a password policy for ARCHER2 in place. What it does is it lets users choose complex short passwords or long but simple passwords. So this means things which are shorter, the sort of typical capital A exclamation mark, B capital X 9C 5S type passwords, a jumble of letters, numbers and characters, which are complicated but probably quite short. Or instead you could use a long simple password, being something, well, the example here is horse battery staple. 3 simple words just strung one after another, but together they're quite long. The idea behind that is that stringing together words makes for something which is ultimately fairly complex in terms of just breaking the password, cracking the password, but which is maybe easier for you to remember. So both of these are supported under the password policy. Julian's just pointed something out here. So this is something I knew nothing about before. Okay, yeah, here we go. So here's the reasoning behind it. If you want to come here and take a look, this is something I wasn't aware, because I'm not really an XKCD person myself. So when I first came across this myself, I was completely unaware of the link here. So if we take a look here, so here's our first exercise, which we can do. Picking a good password. So I think we only need to spend a few minutes here. This isn't particularly tough. We've got 4 examples of passwords here. My password, yep, that sounds great. Rainbow llama jumping, sure. A exclamation mark 94 UFSKL dollar question mark, sure. And horse battery staple again. So if everyone just takes a look at those, and you can just type it in the chat. Which of those passwords, you can just type, 1, 2, 3, and 4 if you think all of them sound good. Which of those passwords do you think would be good for your account under the ARCHER2 password policy? We'll just take a couple of minutes there and then discuss the answers. Ben thinks 2 and 3 sound good. I mean, of course, everyone here, there isn't anything to stop you from clicking on the solution. But we'll all do this in the spirit of fairness, and we won't do that. Okay, so we've got one response that says 2 and 3 are good. Another says 3 is good, but none of the others. Again, when I first did this myself, I was completely caught out here for a reason that may catch some of you out, but we'll see. We'll just spend another short minute on this, as I say, this isn't a super high level question here. Okay, so we've got 3 responses. Everyone so far seems to think that 3 is good, and I would agree. Just looking at it, 3 does look good. It's complicated. It's how many characters is that? That's 11 characters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I think characters. So it's fairly long. It's complicated. It looks like it should be a hard password to crack. Okay, let's just take a look then at the solutions. So I don't want to spend too long on this. So the first one, which no one went for, my password, is obviously a terrible password. It's one of those sort of default bad passwords that always come to mind when you think of them. Things like my password, ABCD123 are terrible passwords. It's things like this are short. They're obvious. It's going to be very easy to crack. Probably if there are people cracking passwords, they try this and probably, unfortunately, get it to work more times than they should do. The second possible one, rainbow llama jumping. Only one person who replied in the chat thought that this would be okay, but it actually would be okay. It's pretty long, and it's easy to remember for us, which is good if we aren't using a password manager. But it's three words which have no obvious connection to one another. Rainbow llama jumping. I don't know about any of you. Those words don't have any connection to one another, for me at least. Maybe they do for you. Maybe, as in the XKCD comic, you can form a little sort of picture in your head linking those words to help you remember it. But in terms of how easy it is for someone to crack this, it should be pretty hard because of the length and the unconnectedness of the words. So 2 is actually an okay option. 3, everyone who replied thought that 3 would be okay. And again, that's because it's complicated. It will be difficult to crack. But again, here, it may be difficult because of that to remember and type. So this is the type of password that you would really want to make sure you were using a password manager for. If you tried to use a different password like this for every single thing that you had a password for, every website that you use, every computing service that you use, you would probably quickly forget all of them. So password managers for passwords like this are really required. Finally, 4, horse battery staple. This is what caught me out, because, as I say, I'm not an XKCD reader, so I wasn't aware that this is actually a popular, well-known example password for this style of password. So horse battery staple, although it looks okay, because it's well known on the internet, is probably a well-known password to try for people who do try to break into people's accounts. So unfortunately, this is a little bit of a trick question, and as I say, it caught me out. But it seems that all of you who answered in the chat saw right through it, so well done for you. You weren't caught out, and you realised that horse battery staple is actually a bad choice because of how well known it is. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea of good ways to keep your account secure in terms of password, at least. We've talked a little about the SSH keys. So everyone has to have an SSH key pair in place. I call them a key pair because probably lots of you already know this. An SSH key pair has a public part and a private part. You generate them both at the same time on your computer. Really, to keep them, to keep the key pair secure, the private key should never leave that computer. Where you should never email it to another machine, or give it to anyone else, or copy it to another machine that you have access to. If it stays on your computer and only on your computer, then in theory that remains a secure key pair. The public part of the key, on the other hand, you put on any machine or any service that you want to use with that key pair. For ARCHER2, as I mentioned a little bit ago, when you create your account, you provide the key then, and you can actually add any number of keys to your ARCHER2 account. So if you want to connect, say, from a desktop at work, and you also want to use your laptop at home, you can create SSH keys on both and copy the public keys from both to your ARCHER2 account through the safe, and then you can connect from both accounts, from both machines, sorry. So we won't go through it just now. If anyone's having trouble, then we can help you do this through the chat. But just in general, if you want to see how to do this, then I would recommend going to this link here, which takes you through to the ARCHER2 documentation site, and you can see there how to create a key. In terms of getting your data to and from, yeah, Julian's just showing that now. Yeah, it's a little different. Creating the keys a little different depending on whether you're using Linux and Mac or Windows, because Windows doesn't have any native tools to do it. So you'll probably end up using MobileXterm in some way, unless you're using Windows subsystem for Linux. It's one of those things. The SSH keys do trip people up quite often. So if any of you are having issues with this in terms of getting logged in, again, this is your chance. Please do let us know now so that we can help you get logged in before we get into the sections of the course actually using ARCHER2. Okay, so with all of that in place, you should then be able to SSH into ARCHER2 using whichever SSH client you have to hand. Of course, that's only part of getting connected. The other thing you want to do is to move data, perhaps code, perhaps input to simulations, perhaps output from simulations, back and forth between ARCHER2 and either your personal machine or any storage that you have elsewhere. Depending on how much data you have, we have a few options to help you do that. Probably everyone's used SCP. Oh, we've just got a question. William's just asked, can I connect from two different devices? For that, will I need to copy two SSH keys? Yes, so you can connect from really as many devices as you need to use to connect to ARCHER2. All that you do is you just generate a new SSH key pair on each one, and then you head to the safe. Could you maybe show this, Julian, if you could, please, if you just pop back to that page. Thanks. Yeah, so there's this button here. So as I say, we'll be coming to this page a lot, your account page. And there's this button here, Add Credential. And if you click on that, credential type, SSH public key, I believe that's the only option. So you just click on Next. And then you can just choose here to choose a file, or else paste in the text of your public key and add that. And you can actually see there's one key actually on Julian's account here. So if you add more keys, you will see more keys appear there. And once that's done, you can connect from any of those machines. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So here we go. So here's another key that Julian's just added, and that'll appear here with status pending. That's why it's in the process of going through to ARCHER2. And then once it's active, you're able to connect from a machine using that key. Yeah, and it normally only takes a few seconds to become active. And you can then delete it if you don't need to connect from that machine anymore. I actually am on one of my accounts on a different machine. We have this last night, found myself going through it because I had about 10 public keys on there and realized that most of them weren't needed anymore. So found myself clearing out a lot of old keys. Yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, great. So yes, so back to data transfer. So probably everyone's used SCP. SCP is the simplest tool to use to move data to and from ARCHER2. This is just a command line tool. We also offer Rsync. Rsync is a bit more of a powerful tool. It offers actually quite a lot of options. It lets you choose whether to compress the data as you move it a bit more easily than SCP does. It also has options for archiving, so only copying files if they're newer than what exists in the destination. So it's probably, you can use both of these if you want to move data on the order of megabytes or gigabytes. But Rsync allows you a bit more control over what's copied and how. Globus Online, actually, I'm not sure, I can't remember if this is active yet. Julian, Alexei, are you aware of this?
I don't think it is.
Yes, I think we're still in the process of getting this working. I think it may be operational. I'm not certain. I need to check that actually. But at the least, if it isn't available now, the intention is to get Globus Online available, which allows for faster transfer of very large amounts of data. Okay, so apparently it is available, but does not yet support parallel streams. So, but this is still probably a better option for using very large amounts of data, for moving very large amounts of data. Okay, does anyone have any other questions at this point, just before we move on to data transfer best practice? I should also say, of course, SCP and Rsync are both Linux command line tools or Mac command line tools, or I guess FreeBSD and the like, if anyone's using other Unix derivatives. If you're on Windows using MobaXterm, MobaXterm has a fairly nice GUI file browser which opens on the left of the terminal that lets you just drag and drop, which can be a fairly simple way of doing things. Using things like WinSCP and FileZilla are also options if you prefer, but I think most people stick with the simple options. Okay, it seems everyone's happy with this. So let's move on then to the last section, we do have another little practical here. Data transfer best practice. So we've kind of said, how to move data, and we're actually going to talk a bit more about this tomorrow. But there is a best practice for moving data, ways to make sure that you essentially have the easiest time of it. So we've got some points here that we really should all be considering as we not only transfer data, but maintain and look after our data. So the first point says that not all data are created equal. Understand your data. This is kind of what it says. We potentially produce, vast reams of data in output from our simulations, or even just from things. If we're say profiling code, perhaps we produce lots of data. It's probably not the case that we actually need to store or really look after all of it. So points it says here are what is your critical data that needs to be copied to a secure location. So critical data would be, things like the source code that you're looking after. You really don't want to just have one copy of your source code in one place. That's very dangerous. Any results from simulations that you really do need to keep safe. And again, that's perhaps only part of the results from those simulations. And the next point, which data do you need in a different location to analyze? It may be that some of your data needs specific tools to analyze, which you only have on some machines somewhere. The next point is actually a little more interesting, I think. Which data would it be easier to regenerate rather than transfer? Some people say have their own analysis codes, which maybe do some processing on output from some job they've run, and perhaps produce huge amounts of output, which is more useful, but very, very quickly. It might be easier to try generating that output in the destination rather than to copy it. Say you've run a job that's produced, let's say 10 megabytes of data, and your post-processing turns that into files of 10 gigabytes of data, maybe even 100. It could be a lot faster to just run the post-processing again on the destination machine rather than to copy files of hundreds of gigabytes. The final point here is that we should think about data management plans. Create a brief data management plan laying this out, as it will allow you to understand which tools to use and when. And this does actually make things a lot easier. I mean, personally, I find everything easier if there's a list of instructions somewhere. I think just having a plan so that you can say, jobs will produce this, I'm going to transfer only these files, I'm going to regenerate this data rather than transfer it. It will help you keep in mind how much data you're creating, where it is, when it should go, what should be done with it. And from that, we get to the other points that follow. Minimize the data that you're transferring. It's fairly obvious. As it says, transferring large amounts of data is costly, both researcher time and actual time. You might spend hours potentially transferring lots and lots of files when you only need to really move some small number of them. And if you need that for something, then it can be a lot quicker if you only transfer the data that you need to transfer rather than everything. You could be twiddling your thumbs for 3 hours waiting for a few hundred gigabytes to come, perhaps if your connection isn't so great, when the files you only need that you need might have only taken 10 or 20 minutes. minimize the number of files that you transfer. This is something that may not be obvious if you aren't aware of this, but every file has a static overhead in data transfers. That means that every file that's copied over SCP or Rsync or the like adds a little bit of time onto how long that transfer takes. Each file metadata needs to be sent. It needs to fire up the connection to do the transfer, and it then needs to close down the connection after the transfer. So every file has this overhead, takes a little bit of time just because it's its own separate file. So if you do have lots of files, and some codes do produce thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of files, it is probably going to be much more efficient to archive them together rather than transfer them all individually. And we'll be talking about this in the exercise just below. The next point, does compression help or hinder? So again, the sort of obvious thing to think here is that, well, if I compress my file, it's a smaller file, therefore it will be faster to transfer. But for some really big things, it can actually take longer to do the compression than the transfer itself. In that case, if you spend time if you spend time doing the compression and then do the transfer, it will have been much faster if you just hadn't bothered to compress it in the first place. And that's particularly the case if you're transferring data between two places with large bandwidths available. So ARCHER2 is directly connected to JANET. That's the academic network in the UK, and that is in turn connected to the academic networks throughout Europe. So if you're doing, in particular, data transfers between ARCHER2 and an institutional machine, the bandwidth should be pretty high. It should be quite a large bandwidth. So particularly in circumstances like that, it may be better to either not compress if you're not going to do the compression, if you're doing the compression manually, or it may be better to, say if you're using Rsync, as I mentioned, which has compression options there, to simply choose to not do that compression as part of the transfer. Another final point is that SCP and Rsync, when it uses the SCP protocols, do encrypt the transfers of data. And that also introduces an overhead for each file to encrypt it. It may be that you particularly want that encryption to be in place. That's down to your own circumstances. But it may be that you don't really care about the encryption. So something that you may want to do to reduce that overhead if you find that your transfers aren't quite as fast as you would like is to change the encryption algorithm to one with, as it says here, minimal encryption. So a really good option. There are many encryption ciphers. Lots of them are new and very advanced, but something like AES128CTR, the one that is mentioned here, should be much faster because these have an actual hardware implementation. This is done at the circuit level, if you like, rather than in software. So this should, if you change the encryption to use AES128CTR, that will quite heavily reduce that overhead per file. If you want to do any of this, there are more details on how to do it in the ARCHER2 documentation. Okay, and at this point, just before we finish this session, so I think we're on time to have our first break at 11 o'clock. We're going to try creating an uncompressed zip archive and verifying the contents. So you should be able to do this if you're logged into ARCHER2. You can just do it directly in your home or work directories. Otherwise, if you're working on a machine of your own with a Linux terminal of any sort available, you can try there. We're just going to try to create an uncompressed zip archive. We're just going to create create a directory called large data output. You can just put a few empty files in there, say, just to you can just imagine that this is a directory with lots of data in it. We just want to find which zip commands would we use to create an uncompressed archive of that directory, and then which zip commands would we use to verify that that file that we've created is not corrupt. This is important. We want to make sure it's not corrupt so that we can then safely delete the original large data output directory. If you aren't sure of this, so we're going to be using zip. You might want to check the man pages for zip. And that may provide the extra information that you need. And Julian's just got the zip man page up. Yeah, so you can always, on any machine, and this is actually, I think, in general, a good tip for using ARCHER2. Almost all of the software on ARCHER2, and even a lot of the things from the modules, which we'll be talking about later on today, have man pages. So you can always just type man space and then the name of the tool and get details of all the command line options and the like. So you can check that, go through the output, see which options are needed to make an uncompressed archive, say. Oh yeah, and as Julian said, yeah, man stands for manual. That's the thing. Remember when I first came across this, I was a bit confused why man meant that we were going to see the instructions for something. But yeah, it's short for manual. So as you can see, the page Julian's scrolling through, there are lots and lots of options here. All of these tools are actually very powerful. But we're just looking in this case just for a few simple things. We want to create an uncompressed archive of a directory and its contents. And then we want to check what is the, we want to check, is it not corrupted? Is it a correct, is it a verified archive? Is it okay to delete what we originally had? So I'll just give people just a couple of minutes. We're just coming up on 11 o'clock, which is when we had the first break scheduled. I have a question here. I would have thought about using tar. Maybe zip is better because it can be easily used on several platforms, while tar is harder in Windows. Tar is a perfectly valid option as well. I personally use, I seem to find myself using zip for things like, essentially like this, for large directories with lots of output, just because I find the commands in zip a little easier. Tar, but as I say, tar is a perfectly valid option. I think the tar commands are a little harder to remember. I generally just remember the sort of default commands for creating a zipped archive, a gzipped archive, and extracting a gzipped archive, because tar has that funny thing, hasn't it, where it has the super old style Unix options as well as the more modern options with the preceding dash. But no, zip and tar. I mean, you could even just go straight to gzip or bzip2 if you wanted. These are all valid options. It really just depends what you want to do. But actually your point is also correct. Tar is a bit harder to deal with in Windows because there aren't any native tools. Well, there aren't any tools included as part of Windows for dealing with tar archives. Okay, you've maybe had just a minute to look through this. Again, this isn't, I think, this isn't a practical exercise that we need to spend a lot of time on. So we'll just take a look at the solution and then run off to our breaks to get some caffeine or whatever we need. Thanks, Julian. So, so yeah, if you've taken a look through the zip manual or just done a quick search on Google to see what options are available for it, we found that really there are two options that we need to use. -R is used to perform the operation recursively on a directory, meaning it's needed to zip not just the directory, but everything inside it and any directories inside it and whatever is inside those directories. And the -0, that's a 0, not an O, are needed to specify that it should be uncompressed. So if we do zip -0R, and then we give the name of the zip archive we want to create, large data output.zip, and then the name of the directory that we're zipping, large data output, that will then create an uncompressed archive of that directory. Once that's done, we've got large data output.zip sitting there on our storage. You can then validate it using the -T option to zip. So you just do zip -T, large data output.zip, and that will then tell us whether the archive is correct or not. I've got another thing. I did not check recently. tar.bz2 or tar.xz tend to give you smaller archives for the same compression level, of course, at the cost of time. I think, I think I recall that bzip2 in particular does, but as you say, at the cost of time. I'm not certain myself. I'm not aware of any particular figures or anything, but I do seem to recall something similar. Yes. Okay, 2 minutes past 11. So let's just quickly go through the key points here. So ARCHER2's login address is something we should probably all remember if we ever want to get logged into ARCHER2. login.archer2.ac.uk. There's a well-documented password policy. It may be when you do first go to log in that that if you don't give a password that matches with the policy, it might say to you, you need a longer password or you need a more complex password. So it's just really a matter of following the policy as we spoke about it earlier on, further up the page here, and that there are a number of ways to transfer data to and from ARCHER2, and how you do it and how you manage your data is probably something you would want to bear in mind, have a plan for, just ultimately to keep things simpler for yourself. Okay, and with that, there's our first session finished. So we'll take a break now. I think we'll take a 15-minute break. So it's nearly 5 past. So that means we're 5 minutes behind the schedule, but I think we can make that up in the next session, which is giving an overview of the ARCHER2 system. So we're talking a little about the hardware architecture, storage, and the like. So we'll come back then at 20 past 11 and carry on with that. So that should give you all time to grab any drinks or anything that you may need to keep you going. Yeah, and as Juna says, this is also an opportunity for any of you, yes, who are still struggling to log in, to get help from us. So please do let us know if you want any help getting logged into ARCHER2. Okay, great. So we'll finish there now then. I'll also see if I can fix my screen sharing troubles with Chrome. That's probably what I get for using Chrome for this. Although it's done a very good job before. And we'll come back at 20 past 11.